Thinking about Atlantis, most people would think of the city at the bottom of the sea, with structure and culture as colorful as ancient Greece. This is the obvious, what we know about Atlantis. To go through the great philosopher's account, the Greeks play too. Todd tells about Atlantis through the character Cretias. And from here the story is told as follows. There's a family of Aveno and Lucipe. They gave birth to their only daughter, Cato. When she was a teenager, her parents died. Then Poseidon fell in love with her. Make love to her behind the mountains, and because of their love, the ground changed. Where they love each other, the sea and land are intertwined. They form circles. To rings of land and be a rings of water, is a god. Have no trouble turning the earth around. It creates two streams of water from underground, hot water and cold water, that make all plants flourish and flourish. Then Mr. Cho was born 5 twins, all male. Divide the area into 10 kingdoms, for each ruler. Next, he gave their first son the largest capital, made king. This is King Atlas. And then his name was also given to that ocean. It's called the Atlas or Atlantis, covering the central area. To rings of land and be a rings of water, separate two circles of land from the center. South of the city is the seaport, bringing maritime trade to the land. The city was made of black and red stones. There are many elephants on the island, and it's all over a vast area of the sea, and beautiful hills and mountains. And since then the capital of Atlantis has been painted as a giant focal point in the world. But from here we come back to reality. The story of Kraz, Platonic Atlantis. It's taken from what Solon told us. Solon is a distant relative of Plato, lived around 630 BC. Solon is a politician, a poet, and on his 15-year journey, Solon went to Egypt, and there's a priest here. Tell the story of the magnificent capital of Atlantis. According to the priest, Atlantis has prospered and grown tremendously, and then it was washed away by water 9,000 years ago. So that's the story of Atlantis, its birth and its death. It happened about 11,600 years ago. It's from an Egyptian. And here's the connection between Atlantis, the capital of legend, with reality. And the myth began. The story of the scourge that came from the Blue Sea engulfed humanity. It's no longer a stranger to anyone. However, when it comes to the convergence of religious beliefs, every time we talk about the flood, we have another story. As we search for the traces of the past in the stratigraphic layers of the earth, scientists have discovered about a time people are drowning in ice. It's an ice age called the Younger Twice. It lasted about 1,300 years. Close to Chises has left the entire northern hemisphere frozen in ice. During this time period, people can survive even if the weather is harsh. Evidence for the life of the wise. In this period, it's located in artifacts that have been discovered around the globe. However, young girl Chris is not the point. What actually happens after younger Chris is scary. There are many different theories. The end of zombie Chris. The Earth's orbit returns to a circular shape. After time is stretched into ellipses, or a giant asteroid attacking the Earth in the northern hemisphere 12,600 years ago are causing scientists to wring their brains out. Research no matter what. 1,300 years in Reese is over. It's a warm time for the Earth, and thanks to the new sound, by Tan Ra, engulfed the world in cataclysmic floods, and in the words of the Salon heard back from the Egyptian priest, the great flood that, it happened around the same time Atlantis sank. The Sahara is a place where few AIs ever set foot, thanks to weather conditions and location too far. Compared to the source of life, to survive in the world's largest desert, we need too many conditions. So after all, it's still a place of mystery that humans haven't really discovered yet. The reason is that the Sao in the middle of the desert has traces of sea, and especially the area called the Eye of the Sahara. The Eye of the Sahara, or the Richard structure, it's a name for a large area. It's 40 kilometers in diameter, and it's made up of a circular land in the center. And then there's two circles around it. It's separated by 3 low-lying areas. Out in these areas of architecture are giant patches of white salt. It's a sign that this used to be a seaport. Next to it, Richard's structure is also home to many Akoyan artifacts. It doesn't just stop there. This area is also located south of the Atlas Mountains. There's evidence of the great river that flows into the Richard area about 11,000 years ago until 5,000 years ago. Create the perfect conditions for people to live here. During that time period, if you look at the design of Atlantis and what's left before the eyes of the Sahara, we can't help but wonder, is this coincidence a coincidence? Probably not. The Sahara Desert cannot contain life. Because this is the desert, let civilization survive there. It must have appeared in about 11,000 years, until 5,000 years ago, when the river that's gone from the form of Mount Atlas is still flowing. That's how there is life, isn't it? When it comes to the Sahara, most people would think of the world's largest desert. This is a place with a harsh climate. It cannot contain life, but maybe not many people know that. This used to be a giant plain. We're all familiar with the concept of 4 seasons. It's mostly temperate and tropical, and the tropics will have a typical 2-season humid climate. The Earth has 4 seasons. It's because of the Earth's axis of rotation in orbit. It's not a 90-degree axis. The Earth rotates on a 23-degree axis. Make a pole of the Earth, always closer to the sun than the other pole, creating the seasons of the year, the inclination of the Earth. It was created and maintained by the moon, or rather by the formation of the moon. According to astronomers, the moon is the remnant of the largest landings. It has happened on Earth, a collision between 2 planets. While the solar system was still forming, the primeval Earth has been hit by a planet the size of Mars. It's called C. The collision created a huge explosion. Most of the material from the sea has been subjected to gravity. The giants of the Earth retained, but the rocks that came out of the explosion has fallen into the Earth's gravity and then converge over millions of years. The moon as it is today, the VA touched it. That caused the tilt on the Earth's axis, and thanks to the moon's gravity, that inclination is held at a fairly stable level to this day. That's why we use the word organ. It's because this axis of the Earth doesn't really sit still. It's swayed as the Earth moves around the sun. Change of the axis of rotation, that the exposure of some areas also changes, leading to climate change. In addition, the Earth's orbit changes from ellipses to circles and vice versa, bicycle, leading to a huge change in climate across the globe. And here we come to the Sahara Desert. Thanks to cyclical climate change, what we call the world's largest desert, it used to be a green place with trees, cool climate, and closer to savanna vegetation than a desert SA. During this time period, it's a place that contains large vegetation and animals along the lake, the largest water the Earth has ever seen. The development of human beings is always associated with the existence of the lake, water or sea river, and add to it, its dozens of carvings, drawings of organisms in areas around the Sahara, specifically as to Sealy and Agers, where the researchers found this picture of the deer, ancient and newspaper. The creatures, we can't find it in the Sahara. It is today. The Sahara used to be a thriving place for life that can support the formation of ancient civilizations. But that's it. It's not enough to claim the Atlantean civilization. It can grow here. Let the civilization of Atlantis survive. It needs to be in the Sahara. It's still green. That's more than 5,000 years ago. Confirm that. It's older than the Mesopotamian civilization and ancient Egypt. However, if you take the words of the Salon and Plato as the basis, the civilization of Atlantis, it would have existed 11,600 years ago. That means it's still in time. The Sahara is green, and with the discovery of the Göbekli Tepe archaeological site, it's from 12,000 years ago, accompanied by traces. It's connected to both the Mesopotamian civilization and ancient Egypt. We have more reason to believe that there was human civilization that exists before any records that we have. Briefly say the existence of Göbekli Tepe has denied the whole belief that ancient civilization doesn't exist. If Atlantis existed in Richard's structure, this capital will exist before 11,600 years. So when Younger Raz is over, the ice melts and pushes the sea level up. Everything will be engulfed in the deluge. Looking at the Sahara Desert, there is no shortage of evidence that it was swept across by the giant tsunami from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. The ripples are kilometers long, not dunes. It's the effect of waves like sand on the beach. In addition to that, there's a lot of marine animals. It's up to 14,000 years old. It is found in the desert, so the possibility of a cataclysm caused by youngsters. This is the reason for the story of Atlantis, buried under the wave of birth. The key point here is that as Peter tells it, Atlantis did not sink to the bottom. That specifically is, the road to Atlantis is now impassable. All roads were covered in mud, and the access from the sea is no longer possible. And according to Egyptian mythology, before everything appears, there's only one giant sea of water. It's called Nun. And then Adam was born and created the world. If Atlantis existed before Egypt, that's not the giant Nun ocean. Will be a deluge from the Jaggets and swept away Atlantis. Next to it, the birth of the Richard structure was due to volcanic eruptions, but not perfect, creating giant dunes of rock, and it's eroded over time to form the rings of Earth as it is now. It's born from volcanic activity. Congratulations to Richard, carry within itself the 7 regular fluctuations of the flow. In other words, it has hot springs and cold water, as in the story of Poseidon and his lovemaking day. Of course, when myths get too close to reality, we have every right not to believe. However, we can't deny that North Africa still holds many mysteries that we still can't explain. The most famous example is how the pyramid was born. Next to it, it's the appearance of erosion because of rainwater. At the foot of the witness that the Sphinx existed when the Sahara Desert, it rains for thousands of years in a row, meaning it could have existed before the ancient Egyptian civilization. No matter what, when we put the pieces together, we can guess what happened to Atlantis when it's located in the Richard structure. Over 11,000 years ago, when the Earth is still far from the Sun, because of its elliptical orbit, the world is covered in ice, and the weather is extremely harsh. However, before that, there's been an extremely developed civilization. It exists in the land that humans now call North Africa. This is Atlantic civilization. Atlantic is the capital of this civilization, located in the Richard structure, a caldera that's shut down with the river system, canals, and the perfect sea gate to propel the economy to super prosperity. Outside the Atlantic, there are many other civilizations that are also evolving. Some left the pyramids around the world. To this day, the prosperity of Atlantis, it seemed like it would last forever, until the Earth returns to a circular orbit and causing the Arctic ice to melt away. End of the Younger Eras thawed to raise the seawater, pushing water from the northern hemisphere down into the tropics, creating huge tides and tsunamis in many places. The Great Flood traveled from the Mediterranean to North Africa and through the Savannah area. It's thriving here, swept away everything including the capital of Atlantis. The flood came from Younger Rise. It's the end of all civilization. Take humanity back to the Bronze Age. Thousands of years later, the Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations were born. The Egyptian civilization, it's still the story of the flood, about a kingdom that once existed in North Africa. He was so powerful that he was called the son of the sea god. And then a monk told that story to Solon, distant relatives of Plato, later told by Platog, through the conversation of his crazies, and pass it on to today's generation as a legend. And that's a little bit of a theory for the location of the submerged city of Atlantis. Location at the Richard structure. It's just one of many different places that the researchers are coming up with when it comes to Atlantis. But this is still just a theory, because there's a lot of different evidence that the ancient civilization before Mesopotamia and Egypt didn't exist.